Phil Prendergast is a member of the European Parliament for Ireland South. Phil has been working on a resolution on tackling homophobia and transphobia in sport, which promotes the inclusion of LGBT people in sport as well as LGBT awareness in sport. And what a great location to have Phil come and talk about LGBT issues in sport. She's also a Kilkenny woman, so I'm delighted to invite another Kilkenny person to the podium. Phil, thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, Minister and distinguished guests. I really am delighted to be here today. I've only recently started saying that I'm from Kilkenny because Kilkenny may actually be in the revised boundaries, but we don't know. But anyway, I live in Tipperary and I'm supposed to be from Tipperary when my sons are listening, but it's good, it's all good. But I would like to thank you, Michael, and the Belong To group for the opportunity to contribute to the discussion today. I am speaking on behalf of the LGBT Intergroup, which is an informal cross-party grouping of 153 MEPs committed to upholding LGBT rights in the day-to-day work of the European Parliament. And its Irish members include, along with myself, Nessa Childers MEP, Emer Costello MEP, Paul Murphy MEP and Marion Harkin MEP. And this conference is focused on the issue of LGBT youth and social inclusion, and the Minister has gone to great lengths to have that discussion. And since we're gathered here in Croke Park, as Michael has said, I thought today would be an appropriate forum for discussing the issue of LGBT youth and sport, particularly focusing on how sport can be used as a tool for bringing various communities closer, not just in Ireland, but across the European Union. I note, before I begin, some of the extraordinary successes of the Irish Presidency on broad interest to LGBT individuals and their families, particularly in the issue of bullying and cyberbullying, where the first discussion on how to tackle the growing problem across the 27 member states took place under the stewardship of the Irish Presidency. And I want to thank the Minister again for her interest in this regard. It does seem to me that we will see specific LGBT themes emerging in future presidencies as the idea gains favour that many issues related to LGBT rights, such as discrimination, employment, social inclusion and health, are not issues which can be effectively dealt with the member state level, but rather require transnational political and legislative responses. And as I listened to Jeffrey there, as in my previous life as a midwife, I want to make just two comments that really, I suppose, made me think how we do things. And one of the things I discovered was in my training as a midwife, and subsequently to that, when I worked in the labour ward, which I did quite a lot, when we would have a baby born with indeterminate sex, we didn't have a narrative for discussing with the parents what to do. And we didn't have a narrative for discussing that this baby may be intersex, this baby may be transgender, it may have identity issues, and the measurement that we used as people was that when we get the chromosome analysis, we'll be able to tell you what your baby is, or when the swelling goes down or goes back or goes away, we'll be able to give you better sort of information. And I used to think there was quite a few things that, you know, I suppose it categorised, maternity hospitals were all about categorising. The patient was nearly always the person wearing the night clothes in the daytime. The blue balloon meant she'd had a boy, and the pink balloon meant she had a girl, and there wasn't really another colour for saying, well, we don't know what it is. And it made me think. And further, Jeffrey mentioned about by the age of 12, most people would know what their orientation is. And I would contest that, whilst I wouldn't dream of disagreeing with that. But as part of my role as a midwife, where each year there would be 4 or 5 lovely young people between perhaps as young as 14 or 13 to 15, 16, 17, having babies, 4 or 5 in a little small hospital that had 12 or 1,400 deliveries per year. And because of that, I was invited into schools because I could talk about things that the teachers who were going to be doing mathematics or geography next didn't really want to talk about: erections, crisis pregnancies and sexually transmitted infections. So I devised the school programme following the HSE guidelines about those young people. And as part of the talks that I gave, it was about sexual identity, which only formulated a tiny part of a 40 or 50-minute session. But you know, the relief for some of those young people to have the first opportunity to be able to speak that which was never spoken before, or they were having this conflict within themselves. And I thought there's 2 things that I need to learn. First of all, as a professional people that are trying to make everything inclusive, we are so lacking in knowledge and narrative about how we deal with something when the crisis could start in that moment of conception by the parent's reaction to a baby whose sex is not easily determined at the outset. That was one thing. And then I read a great book by Jeffrey Eugenides, I think is the pronunciation, but it may not be the correct one, a book called Middlesex, which again gave me a fairly fascinating insight into, again, a subject I knew very little about, but I have departed entirely from my script. But I just wanted to share those, I suppose they're something that informed me and made me feel that there is such a lack, and we know so little really, and we have so much to learn. If we think today about Irish society and the role of the GAA and the FAI in communities all over Ireland, social inclusion and sport go hand in hand, and any comprehensive discussion, of course, for strategies on welcoming LGBT young people in from the cold margins of an unjust, unfair society must include a strong focus on sport. And the LGBT sports movement, which has flourished in Ireland, actually, and across the EU over the past 20 years, has done outstanding work in breaking down barriers between LGBT people and eliminating isolation. It has brought a community closer together, and it has made it stronger and more cohesive. Popular and prominent events such as the Gay Games have helped tackle prejudice and unfounded stereotypes surrounding what it means to be LGBT. But while there still remains within sport and within Irish sport 2 distinct playing fields, one for LGBT people and one for straight people, I think the time has come that a young gay person should play on the same field and on the same team as his straight best friend without fear or favour. There's a glass ceiling of homophobia which acts as a barrier to full participation of LGBT people in sport in Ireland, and sometimes the homophobia is expressed outwardly and can be shot down openly. But there also exists a more subtle, almost bureaucratic barrier to LGBT participation. That barrier that says there is no active problem with LGBT people playing sport, or that there's no need to make a big deal of it. This type of argument is much more potent and much more prevalent, because what is required to get more LGBT people playing hurling, rugby or soccer at a young age is not negative, we have no problem, but rather positive, proactive encouragement of LGBT involvement. And sports organisations, and particularly sports organisations which receive public funding through the Lotto or the Department of Sport, must live up to their responsibility to act as a positive force for social inclusion in Ireland through their policies, their procedures, guidelines and their strategies. And they must examine all of the possible boundaries to LGBT young people participating in sports, and then one by one begin the process of removing those barriers. It would be my strong conviction that grant awarding bodies such as government departments or the Lotto should include basic and measurable targets for LGBT inclusion before the awarding of any grant. It would be a start. In the Intergroup, we have begun the process of examining the issue of homophobia in sports across the European Union, and in September we will introduce a written declaration into the European Parliament which calls for the adoption of a charter for best practice for sporting organisations and government departments across the EU. If successfully passed, the declaration will call on the Commission to conduct a full study of LGBT involvement in sports across the Union, something which is critically missing from the discussion at European level at the moment. It is undoubtedly true that sport plays a central role in Irish society, possibly more so than in any other member states, and that makes it even more critical for us to encourage and promote LGBT youth in playing our games and sports, as without their participation we can't say as a society that we have reached a stage of full inclusion. And I'm really delighted to be here today. I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to share my thoughts on what we hope to do to make it more positive for people in Europe, and to give, to listen to what other contributors have to say. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you for being you're laughing at my little run there. I think you've been a great ally to the LGBT community in Ireland and across Europe. Actually, I think we might take a couple of questions. Nevin's had to step out for a couple of minutes, so there is some space to ask some questions. Was that okay? Sorry, I feel terrible. I think we're putting awful pressure here, are we? But I should just pick up on a couple of points that Phil made. I think it's a really important point to raise around the position of sport in social inclusion, because sport plays such an incredibly important and powerful role in the lives of LGBT young people. And I particularly liked your phrase of the glass ceiling of homophobia and transphobia in sport. And I suppose for the young people that we work with, that's really very, very evident. And we're really looking forward to your declaration at the EU Parliament. So thank you so much for that.